Welcome to B2B Commerce Corner. Commerce Corner is a sub-series of the E-Commerce Edge podcast discussing all things B2B commerce through the lens of agencies, consultants, merchants, and more. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the E-Commerce Edge podcast with me, Jason Greenwood, your host. I have an amazing guest, which is actually going to act as a co-host with me today, instead of just having a straight one-shot deal where, with most of my guests, I get them on for one episode, we cover a topic in depth for around an hour, and then that's it. But lately, I've been starting to release multi-episode master series episodes on a given topic. That gives me and my guest / co-host the opportunity to go deep on a specific topic. And oftentimes those topics, you simply cannot cover them off in sufficient depth and give them the sufficient, respect and love that they deserve in a 45-minute to an hour episode. So I would love to welcome Mr. Sam Gupta from Elevatiq. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you so much, Jason. And it's going to be a little frightening experience, to be completely honest, because you are super knowledgeable. And I don't know if I mentioned this to you or not. We have done roughly 600 episodes on our pod. And you are probably among top 5, top 10 people who really know their stuff. So co-hosting with you is going to be a little frightening experience.
Look, I think you're going to be amazing. And one of the reasons why I did want to get you on to this master series, and we'll announce the topic in a second, but the reason that I wanted to get you on is because you are experienced, you know your stuff, you're a very good speaker, over 600 episodes of the WSB Rocks podcast.
WBS.
WBS Rocks podcast, and you cover all things business systems, ERP, enterprise architecture. Like, you get into some deep subjects around business management, for lack of a better term, business management software and systems and processes. You get into depths on those things that even I don't get into on my own podcast. And so I think this is going to be a very, very deep, meaningful master series. And what this master series is, it's all about ERP for B2B businesses. So this is manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors. What does ERP mean in that context? Because obviously we've got ERPs for retail, and we've got ERPs for e-commerce, and we've got ERPs for B2C, D2C. We got ERPs that are deeply specialized in specific verticals like fashion, obviously homewares, construction, manufacturing. Like, we've got ERPs that are some of them are generic in nature, that they try to be all things to all businesses. And then we have vertical and industry and category specific ERPs as well. We've got global behemoths. We've got NetSuite, we've got SAP, we've got Oracle, we've got these global household name ERPs, and then we have smaller, lesser known ERPs. We have cloud native SaaS, multi-tenant SaaS ERPs, famously NetSuite. We have famously, on-premise ERPs like Odoo. So the world of ERPs is massive. The world of ERPs is ever expanding, and the world of ERPs is complex. So my goal with this master series is to bring down that complexity level a little bit, to help manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors understand how they can make the business case for ERP, why ERP might be relevant to their business, what scale does their business need to be at before they need to start thinking about an ERP, how they can extract value out of an ERP implementation project to make sure that the project is a success, that it sees internal and external adoption. So we're going to cover a lot of deep components of this. But I'd love to give you a moment just to introduce yourself and sort of give your background and your take on how you even got into this amazing world of ERP, business systems, and enterprise architecture.
Yeah, happy to. And I'm glad that you are doing a little focused, topic for this, because when you talk about ERP for many different industries, sometimes it's like, okay, what the hell are you talking about? Because that is something completely different, right? So it's always easier conversation when you focus on specific industries. Now, about me, how I got into this. So I come from very deep implementation background, from the enterprise architecture perspective, implemented pretty much every single category out there for very large enterprises, which is going to be your any systems that go in the enterprise architecture fabric, not necessarily the siloed systems, I guess. Whatever makes that operational fabric from the sales, marketing, operations, HR, finance, accounting, you name it. Pretty much you need everything for that operational fabric. So that's what I have personally done. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about Elevate IQ, if that's okay. So Elevate IQ is it's known as more of the independent analyst and advisory firm. So we are not SI, and sometimes we get requests from a lot of different vendors. Hey, I have a cool product. You must be an agency. We are not an agency. We are not SI. So we are known as analyst research firm as well as advisory. So the way this works is we track roughly, at this point of time, we are tracking 52 different enterprise software categories. So we research, we rank, we evaluate, we help companies select many different, technology systems. And obviously ERP is a major focus for us, just because the transformation initiatives that we are looking at, they are all driven by, some sort of ERP flavor is there in our engagement. So I don't know, Jason, if that gives you a little background about me and the company.
It absolutely does. And I think one of the things that we want to cover off today that I think is absolutely fairly and squarely in your wheelhouse is what does ERP mean in the context of B2B commerce? So what does what role or roles, because oftentimes we see roles, multi-role. ERP often plays a broader business system role inside of manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors than it does inside of just a retailer that's running, really purely running it for financials, maybe inventory management, maybe, pricing management, things like that. When we start thinking about ERP in the context of any B2B operation, oftentimes the ERP is the beating heart of the business. It is literally, these businesses oftentimes cannot operate without an ERP. And can you talk about some of the reasons why you have seen that is the case? Because oftentimes, whether we're manufacturing, we're trying to run a manufacturing line, or we're a distributor and we're working with inside sales reps, and we've got account managers, and we've got people setting up unique and custom price lists for each customer in our ERP system, etc. The ERP system, and oftentimes the ERP fulfills functions like the CRM. They oftentimes have a CRM module built into them, and I'd love your thoughts on how and why ERP is just so mission critical in the B2B world.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So before that, I guess, I want to touch on one layer from the financial standpoint in terms of how companies evolve. And then I'll come back to the ERP and the importance of ERP and why they matter a lot more for the B2B manufacturing and distribution. So overall, when you look at the evolution of any company, and I don't know which customer base you generally engage with, Jason, but for the most part, this is a generic financial timeline. Okay, so the way this works is, and these are referred to as more of the financial inflection points. If you speak to anybody or CFOs, they sometimes know, it's not official as such, but finance people generally know about it. Okay, the first financial inflection point that you have in the company's journey is going to be roughly around that $10-ish million. And Jason, I know that. We have had a lot of different back and forth in terms of the comments, and you are probably going to agree with this analysis. Okay, so you have the first inflection point, which is like a $10 million. The second is roughly 25-ish. Then the third is going to be roughly 50-ish. Then 100, then 250-ish. And again, this is not set in stone as such, but these are, and 250, and then billion, and then 5 billion, and then it just
it goes up from there.
Goes up, exactly. But the idea of these financial inflection point is that you will have to make material changes to the business. And if you don't make those changes, then what happens is revenue growth is great, but your cost actually grows far faster. And that's where you run into financial trouble. So now, why ERP? The reason why ERP matters is because, yes, ERP is a system, and ERP could have many different meanings who you talk to, I guess. But the whole idea of ERP is the consolidated operations. Okay? Consolidated operations, when I say, meaning people have to play as a team. That's what I mean by consolidated operations. Okay? Sometimes it's a good idea to play as a team. Sometimes you might do better when you are playing, I guess, solo sport in the same ground. These are all different approaches in terms of how you want to attack. But the approach that you are going to take is going to decide, what you are going to see in your top line as well as your bottom line, right? So again, the key term, if you go by this consolidated operations, then you would do far better. Now, the way ERP systems have evolved over the period of time, there was a time, if you go back to like 1980s, 1990s, connected operations wasn't even possible. Technology wasn't there. Okay. So maybe you could connect, I don't know, maybe finance and inventory. But now in 2025, you can connect a lot more. But again, I'm not saying that connecting is always a good idea. But once you reach that point, sometimes the connecting is a better idea. But once you grow to a point, let's say if you're going to be $1 billion, moving everybody together as a team is going to be nearly impossible. So that's why the strategy differs at each of those inflection points. Now, I'm going back to your point. Why is it so critical for B2B and manufacturing? You go to a retail shop, you probably don't need an ERP. Even, I mean, I have spoken to one of the largest retailers here in Canada, and I was like, okay, which ERP system are you using? ERP system, okay, our ERP system is actually inside the POS layer.
Yeah,
What?
it's the pause, and it's maybe connected to an accounting system in the back end, like a QuickBooks or something like that.
They consolidate inside the FP&A CPM software. They have a BI layer, homegrown, 25 people, somehow managing, running business. Don't need an ERP in the retail business. Okay. You might need, I mean, obviously they are able to manage their inventory, merchandising, whatever they are doing. They are able to manage their store operations. Somehow they are able to survive. They are profitable. Zero problem. Okay.
Wow.
But for
You
B2B,
could never get that in the B2B world.
Exactly. Because in the B2B world, the challenge is that the cost matters. Okay. The products are not as streamlined. In retail, your OEMs are dictating the price. Okay. So you have very standard product definition. You are simply distributing. You already know whatever you are selling. You are probably going to sell for $10, $15, whatever. You make 30% cut, 20% cut, whatever. Your business is running. World is good. Right?
Well, and there's only one price per product across your entire business. Whereas typically in the retail space, whereas in the B2B world, price is typically a attribute of the customer, not an attribute of the product. And this is another key differentiator that I see in the B2B world that makes it almost impossible to manage a large scale B2B operation without some form of an ERP. And I think it's worth pointing out even the definition of an ERP: enterprise resource planning system. That it's in the name, enterprise.
Yeah.
Like usually B2B businesses that are over $10 million, they by definition, they're starting to get into the enterprise end of the equation where they need enterprise capability.
Exactly, could not agree more. So depending upon the micro vertical, and that's why the ERP is it's not a technology solution, it's a very business solution. And when you get into every single micro vertical, the product is going to be very different, and each product is going to have millions and millions of variables, and the hierarchy of those variables is going to be different as well. So the pricing, costing, the inventory, the procurement, everything is so intertwined that you need to move together. And if you don't move together, you are going to get a lot of variances. Okay. And variances is the term, from the finance accounting perspective. So you can simplify the process from the sales and marketing perspective. You can do that. You can have very standalone operations. Hey, I'm processing these orders in my POS. Deal is done. Great. World is good. But when you simplify your front end operations, what happens is you are going to complicate your back end operations, meaning that's going to be a hit on your bottom line. So now, which is a cheaper approach? Don't ask me. Because that's the analysis that you have to do. What is the cost of what is going to be cheaper? And that's what, if you ask a CFO, they will tell you whether they are, and everybody talks about, hey, let's go digital. Okay, great idea. But what is the cost of going digital, and whether that specific channel is going to be profitable or not? So I don't know if I'm making sense here, but I gave you some layers overall in terms of the financial inflection point, B2B manufacturing, why it matters in these spaces a lot more than the other spaces.
Makes complete sense. And what I'm seeing in the market is that below the $10 million annual revs inflection point, we see all sorts of random solutions that get businesses from startup to that $10 million inflection point, whether they're a manufacturer, wholesaler, distributor, doesn't matter. All the way from, and I've seen literally just the entire business run up to $10 million, run purely out of spreadsheets in Excel or Google Sheets. I've seen other businesses that they'll run their business in a combination of maybe some spreadsheeting combined with something like a Xero or, a QuickBooks or a small accounting package, right? A MyOb, something like that, a mind your own business type of accounting package, something small, something lightweight, something inexpensive, and really it acts primarily as just a general ledger and a financial reconciliation platform in their business, and it helps them to manage their taxation. That's primarily what those low-end accounting packages allow these businesses to do, is to understand, okay, I can at least generate an invoice out of my accounting package. I can at least track my accounts payable, my accounts receivable. I can at least do reconciliations. I can at least do entries against my general ledger. I can manage my expenses. I can give access to my accountant, which usually up until $10 million, even a B2B business, they typically will not have a financial controller yet. They usually will not have a CFO yet. They will usually you may have an internal bookkeeper or maybe an internal HR person who does a little bit of bookkeeping on the side. But most of the time, up until that $10 million mark, you'll have like an external accountant or an external financial controller, what I like to call a fractional accounting person that then logs into your accounting package to make sure everything's tickety-boo and you're complying with your tax obligations and your HR obligations and all those sorts of things. So would you like to speak maybe a little bit to that pre-$10 million inflection point and the kind of things we see in a pre-ERP world?
Yeah. So the your assessment is spot on. Okay. In fact, in some cases, what happens is what we have seen in these businesses, not just in manufacturing, distribution, in other businesses as well, that they are not even going to have a software. So what these accounting firms they do is they are going to have a spreadsheet, and what these guys are asking is, hey, we hate bookkeeping. Don't ask us to do bookkeeping. If you want to do bookkeeping, you need to hire your bookkeeper because nobody likes admin work, right? So they will give them a spreadsheet, and a spreadsheet is going to have a format in which they sort of communicate, accept, or whatever. But creating that spreadsheet is a nightmare because it does increase a lot of work. Now, in that pre-10 million segment, the number of transactions that you have, they're not a lot. You are still okay. Your bookkeeping cost is not going to be as much. That's why it's probably okay. Okay. And sometimes, one thing that people forget is the cost of automation. Sometimes you create these technical systems, but they actually create more work. So it's not always smart to create the technical systems. You need to assess, okay, whether the automation is going to make sense for, that specific use case as well as for the business as well. So again, in that $10 million segment, you just don't have complex problems, to be completely honest. Okay. And that's why they are completely okay in running on a spreadsheet. By the way, one thing that, businesses should always pay attention to is that in that segment, you just don't have a skill set. And I think you did mention that, right? You don't have controller, you don't have a CFO. Most likely, these are going to be just the founders, that are running the business. The other people, let's say if you look at manufacturing, distribution, you are probably going to have 10 warehouse workers. They are not very savvy, seasoned people. They're not going to have a lot of experience.
It's not a sophisticated business when you're that small.
Exactly. So now, if you are going to introduce an ERP, and I think you agree with that, Jason, that, okay, in that $10 million segment, they will not be able to operate because you require very different skill set. You require very different mindset. So again, that financial inflection point is very different. That run siloed if you have to. Don't install something like NetSuite in that segment. It's very high chance that you are probably going to fail, even though that, okay, these system vendors, or they might argue that, the sooner you get to them, it's going to be easier. But what we see in the market when you look at these companies, they just cannot handle it, at that level, and they don't need it. So that's why that particular inflection point is very different. So whatever you were saying, is fairly natural for that, okay, just have a bunch of SaaS, run somehow, spreadsheet, smart sheet, whatever you have to do, just somehow survive.
survive and try to focus on growing the business so that you can get to that $10 million revenue mark as fast as humanly possible. So then you can justify the investment in an ERP, the timeline, both in terms of internal resources plus external resources that are going to usually help you do the implementation. Plus, at that point, at $10 million, you're probably going to need to hire at least an internal controller, a financial controller of some variety, if not a CFO, then at least some sort of a controller that can come in. They can kind of own the ERP operations, at least from a financial perspective. And then at that point, you're probably going to get enough value out of that ERP implementation that it justifies the investment. And it's not just the upfront implementation investment, but it's the licensing fees and it's the costs associated with running and operating that platform on an ongoing basis. Once you get over $10 million for most businesses, they can then start to justify the cost of the upfront and ongoing investment in an ERP system.
Yeah, so I'll mention some more points if you're okay with that. So at this step, it's not going to be just the talent. Obviously, you would need the talent. You need budget to be able to implement ERP. Yes, you need the internal skill set. Yes, you need the external skill set. But what is something that most businesses miss is that they don't realize that you have to make fundamental changes to your data. And I'll give you some very specific examples, okay? So, for example, let's say if you look at QuickBooks, 90% of the data sets that you have inside QuickBooks are not necessarily coded. And the reason why they are not coded is because QuickBooks is a file-based system. It does not have the real indexing of those data sets. So you don't need, you might have a SKU, but you don't have a real formal SKU. Even if you are going to have a SKU, it's simply going to have a number. You just don't have all of those layers that are going to be relevant to be able to get the business intelligence that you are going to require to be able to, move your production plus your supply chain plus your, accounting plus your sales together. That's a very heavy lift for the majority of the business. And if you don't change that, if you're going to shove everything as is, even if you hired, CFOs, controllers, they have not gone through as many cycles to be able to know how to standardize this. And by the way, this is not just the technical argument. It's also the political argument. Because when you are going to make these changes, it's going to have impact to pretty much everybody in the business. And not only internal, but external impact. For example, let's say if you have serial numbers that you are printing on your some sort of fancy packaging that you send out to your customers, and you have been printing these serial numbers for last 5 years. Now, I, as the ERP guy, I am coming here and I'm going to ask you, hey, buddy, you have to change those. They're not going to work.
We have to create a new model, a new data model for this serialization, and we want to adopt the serialization model that's native to the ERP, which means we're probably going to have to change the downstream systems that have to consume that serialization, and so therefore we're going to have to change the integrations and everything else. And the other thing that I see, and I'd love your take on this, is that oftentimes manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors that are less than $10 million, so let's say they're running, I don't know, QuickBooks, or it could be freaking Xero or Maya, but it doesn't really matter. They're running some sort of just a basic accounting general ledger package where they can track their financials and that's about it. But what they usually have running alongside that is a CRM. So usually they'll be running a Salesforce, they'll be running a Copper, they'll be running some sort of a Salesforce, they'll be running a Capsule, or they'll be running Zoho, or they'll be running alongside their lightweight accounting package, they're running a lightweight CRM system. And this is to manage everything to do with sales, whether it be outbound, whether it be inbound, whether it be customer service, account managers, whatever it is, to manage a pipeline of sales from lead to cash. So to manage that process from the time that a potential opportunity comes into the business, whether it's inbound or outbound, and then tracking that all the way through to revenue recognition if revenue comes in from that opportunity, right? And the reason that they need to do that is to track sales rep performance, to be able to make sure that they're doing, that they are scaling up their sales operation in line with revenues and opportunities, and make sure that they've got the right people in place to be able to meet the needs of the market and to build relationships and all those things. So they usually need a CRM to do this. But the problem is sometimes they become so deeply embedded in their chosen CRM of choice between $0 and $10 million, that when it comes for them to transition to a formal ERP, and oftentimes, like 9 times out of 10, that ERP has its own CRM module built in because it's tied into the accounting function of the platform, and it's built into the resource management portion of the platform and allocation. And therefore, sometimes what I have witnessed is the adoption of an ERP or transition to an ERP is hobbled because of what you just said. They've got these data structures in these alternate systems, and when they want to move to an all-in-one or a suite-based or modularized ERP system, that transition becomes really difficult because you need to get the data out of the old system and get it into the new system. And so what I see is oftentimes the transition from a legacy accounting system to a formal ERP oftentimes will take place, and they'll go live at the start of a new financial year, so that they can close the books in the old system and they can open up the new financial year in the new system and start with a somewhat clean sheet of paper as much as possible. Have you seen these types of challenges in the transition at that inflection point of 0 to 10 million and then 10 million and above?
Yeah, 100%. And honestly speaking, I guess where people don't understand the boundaries of these systems, and that's why looking at this more from the enterprise architecture as well as more from the category perspective is really, really, really important. ERPs are not necessarily designed to do the CRM function. CRM is as big a category as ERP, depending upon how deep you are in your sales cycle as well as your marketing, right? So it's going to have a lot of different layers, and ERP systems are not necessarily designed for that. The reason why you have the CRM module as part of ERP is because you need some sort of placeholder or the interface to be able to communicate between these two systems. Again, the CRM module of ERP is not supposed to be the replacement of the CRM category, the dedicated CRM category. You have your HubSpots of the world, you have your Salesforces of the world, Pipedrive, Sugar CRM, you name it. There are so many different CRMs out there, and they can do a lot more from the CX. You get into telco scenarios, you get into the whole advertising. E-commerce is a category in itself. So we are, again, that's a very, 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 very different category. But with each system, you are going to have overlap, okay? When you are using them in the siloed manner, when you were mentioning that, at that time, your boundaries may be slightly inflated. And the reason for that is because you did whatever you could. And sometimes...
just to survive.
Exactly. And there are no traffic rules in those systems. And that's where the real problem is. So, for example, ERP is going to have the most traffic rules. And that's why everybody absolutely hates it. Because nobody likes traffic rules, right? I mean, given a choice, you would not have any traffic rules whatsoever. But then what is going to happen if you don't have that? Then people are going to get killed, right? So that's why the traffic rules are important. The right amount of traffic rules, which people are going to appreciate, follow, is what matters. So now, how do you balance this between the traffic rules versus a category, let's say, for example, CRM? So that's where you need to do the comprehensive analysis from the business transformation perspective in terms of what you are trying to do, the enterprise architecture, which is going to have the clear boundaries of CRM plus ERP plus WMS plus TMS plus e-commerce plus your PLM plus CAD. I think you are going to have those as well.
Plus PIM.
Exactly. There are a million categories of enterprise software. It was never meant to be like one system. Sure, if you ask any ERP vendors,
one ring to rule them all, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, they are shipping the whole enterprise architecture these days, to be completely honest, because they acquired all of these companies, and they are saying that, hey, it's all fully integrated, fully baked. It's integrated from their perspective. It's not integrated from your data as well as from your process perspective. And you are going to have deviations, and those deviations are going to drive whether it is going to work, whether your people are going to like it or not. The other factor that you need to keep in mind is going to be your skill set. And the skill set is equally important as well. So, for example, let's say, again, you are coming from that $10 million, place. People are used to of using, a bunch of siloed apps, spreadsheet, Salesforce, maybe, they have used QuickBooks. Now, if you transition them to ERP, it's going to be a nightmare. They're never going to appreciate that. Okay, the reason why they are not going to appreciate it is because they have never gone through the whole therapy process in understanding, appreciating those traffic rules. And that takes a long time.
Or even recognizing the benefits
exactly
of a more unified holistic system, because oftentimes, for example, I see sales teams, they become wedded to a CRM, for example, and they say, well, look, we've had this CRM in the business, maybe it's Salesforce, whatever, for 5 years. Our sales reps love it. We've got our workflows absolutely nailed. We've got
Yeah.
all of our data sets in there. We've got every single touch point in there. We've got our call cycles in there. Maybe we even have CPQ as
Yeah.
part of our CRM system, which is how we manage all of our quoting happens inside this CRM system for our highly engineered products, for example, with long lead times, etc. We're managing all of our sales cycles and our revenue recognition. We're actually managing that inside of our CRM. So in many cases, up until that $10 million mark,
Yeah.
CRM is actually more impactful for a manufacturer or a distributor than the ERP would be. And so that in order to even get from 0 to 10 million, they kind of usually will need a CRM, but they may not feel like they need an ERP, right? And so I feel like that each silo in the business, unfortunately, up to that $10 million mark, they fall in love with their
Yeah.
specific piece of software. And
Yeah.
even when they transition to the ERP, even if it makes more business sense to kind of have more functions
Yeah.
centralized in the ERP, oftentimes there is a lot of resistance there, because if you do not manage your change management well, these people are going to be so anti that they'll torpedo the project from the inside out, and this
Exactly.
is a real danger.
It is a real danger, and sometimes, I mean, it's very hard to coach because salespeople are salespeople, right? They all want to make numbers, and which is fair, to be completely honest. There is nothing fundamentally wrong about it, and that's why some of these categories, if you look at the categories that are really prevalent in the sales and marketing world, and and sometimes, I mean, it's kind of funny because if you ask them, okay, what do you want to use, they will tell you that, okay, just give me easy to use system. Okay, I don't want anything complicated. Just give me easy to use. Okay, but we'll give you easy to use. Now, would you care for data? Yes, obviously. We need data. We need the best quality data. You are never going to get best quality data if you are
Not
going
out
to
of
have just the
the simplest system. That's the problem.
exactly, because you don't have those traffic rules, and the data is going to be really bad, I guess.
Yeah.
When you just don't have any sort of alignment between the data sets, the way it is being captured, you are allowing pretty much everything, and somebody has to go. I don't care whether it is going to be automated process or going to be a real person or the accountant who is going to do the real reconciliation. So how many ever databases or data silos that you are going to have, you are looking at as many reconciliation cycle. And regardless of, I don't care how advanced AI is going to be, and I'll change my positioning on that. Okay, so I have seen AI to be really, really powerful in certain cases, and there is a possibility that we might be able to get rid of all of this. Okay, but in this particular case, what is going to happen is when you create these data silos, somebody has to do the reconciliation, and when the reconciliation is done, then only you are going to get the connected data, the insight that most people would need. They are only going to care for the insight from their perspective, but still, if you want reliable insights, that has to come from these connected data sets, and if they are not going to be connected from the get-go, you are never going to get that insight. So that's the danger in this. Now with AI, and I think we are going to have a lot more conversation about AI as well. So one of the interesting use cases that we are seeing that some of the ERP vendors are able to do. So one of the problems, the fundamental problems of ERP, why it was the most hated system ever created, I guess. you know
People swear more about the ERP system than any other system in the commerce stack.
Exactly. I mean, I don't think there's going to be any sort of disagreement there. I've never found a person who's going to disagree on this one, right? So one of the reasons why they hated, and everybody, including the ERP consultants, because it was so hard to use. And the reason why it was so hard to use is because you had 10,000 different tables underneath. You had so many different business rules nested. You need so much training. You need to remember so much. Everybody's lazy. Nobody
Well,
wants to
and
remember.
even the navigation, and even just the navigation menus to get to the function you need to get to, oftentimes was, you needed a PhD in UX to be able to navigate some of these systems just purely from a navigational perspective, because they have so many functions centralized under one system or one login,
Yeah.
that being able to navigate around within these systems to do what you need to do was just, for many people, an exercise in futility.
Exactly, and that's a sort of the training issue, because they just didn't have the training for the appreciation why those things are done that way, and nobody really had patience to be able to learn all of that. Because at the end of the day, what everybody wanted to do is just let me do my job. Okay, that's what I care for. I'm my
That's
kids.
what I'm getting paid for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and let's move on, right? So now with AI, the challenge that it is really trying to solve right now is it's very interactive. The whole, especially the generative AI. So what it can do is it's going to be a very text based interaction, and you don't have to be perfect in your text. You can literally dump whatever you like, and it is going
Yes.
to respond with something. To be
Or
completely
even
honest,
voice,
exactly.
rapidly.
That's probably going to be next. So now what we are seeing, the kind of scenarios that we are seeing is that now AI is able to interact with even these screens. That's going to give you the insight even if you don't know what you are doing, you have zero training whatsoever, so you are able to interact with that. Now the next stage that we are going to see is probably going to be AI agents. They are going to be modeled and they are probably going to be trained, and hopefully they can resolve all of these variances as well as the reconciliation cycles. If that is going to happen, there is a possibility that we will be able to have all of these best of breed systems that everybody appreciated, and the heavy lifting, the grunt work, can be done by these AI agents, and hopefully they are going to be cheaper than a real human.
Yes.
But there is a possibility that we might have that world. But again, if you really want the data integrity, if you want the financial integrity of your processes, okay, you need the consolidated operations. If you don't have that, you have to work very hard. It might be easier from the front end perspective, but from the back end perspective, it's going to be really hard. So I know we spoke a lot there, so I'm pretty sure you're going to have some follow up there, right?
Yeah, what I'd love to also get your take on is the concept of what I like to call ERP like or ERP light systems. So
Yeah.
I don't consider, there's a lot of systems out there that call themselves an ERP, but that I don't personally consider them an ERP because they do not manage the financials.
Yeah.
And so, platforms like Sin7, platforms like Bright Pearl,
Yeah.
other business management technologies that
Yeah.
do lots of things. They might have CRM, they might have OMS, they might have IMS, they might have WMS, they might have manufacturing, they might have all these other functions within
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And they might even be able to manage price lists and
Yeah.
customer accounts
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
cataloging and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But to me, if a core system like that does not manage your financials, your
Yeah.
general ledger, your reconciliations,
Yeah.
your taxes, if it
Yeah.
doesn't do any of those things, then to me, that is not an ERP. It is an ERP like or an ERP light system that oftentimes those ERP light systems, they will leverage an accounting package
Yeah.
to do just the financial piece. So they might plug in or natively integrate with something like a QuickBooks or a Xero or a MyOb or something like that. So they'll manage all the heavy lifting of the business process,
Yeah.
but then they sync all of their data natively
Yeah.
down to an accounting package to manage the financial piece. To me, that does not constitute an ERP because they don't manage the financials as the beating heart
Yeah.
of the operational structure of the business. Whereas for an ERP, it starts with the financials module. Like that is what everything else is built around. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, could not agree more. And I guess, it's all very relative, depending upon how you look at it. But for the most part, the way this works is if you go back to my definition of consolidated operations, okay, so if you are going to consolidate pretty much everything, meaning you have the accounting plus procurement plus your the finance plus your supply chain plus your
Your
sales,
P&L.
exactly all of that, right? So if you combine all of that, then obviously that's going to be an ERP. Generally the approach that these lighter systems take is, and this you are going to find in the e-commerce community as well, if you ask them, okay, what is inventory for you? Okay, please define what is inventory for you. Okay, and the answer that you are going to get, Jason, is inventory is supposed to be counts, just the count, right?
Yes.
That is not the inventory from the perspective of finance person. Finance
Yes.
person cares for the cost. Finance person cares for when a product is received. What
Yes.
is the cost of that receive? How that is going to be accounted towards inventory.
Inventory that's inbound, on the water, in the factory that we're already paying for. Every stage of a product's life cycle counts towards inventory in some way.
Exactly, and this is the inventory equation, and everybody has different version of equation from their perspective. So if you look at systems like Sin7, you mentioned, right? So Sin7 is what they are doing is they are removing all of the layers that are not relevant for them. So they have created, a truncated version of the data set that is going to be relevant only for the sales, marketing, it a little bit of
And
supply
fulfillment.
chain. Yeah. So exactly. Everything else, it's just accounting. That's not how ERP systems work. ERP systems are supposed to be very nested business rules, and it's supposed to be one equation. And in this particular case, when you look at this, you ask anybody if they have used these systems, your inventory is always going to be off. They will
Yes.
be writing off a lot. They are going to have missing. Sometimes they are going to rebrand this as
Returns, quarantine products, the whole 9 yards.
some random names, Phantom, Ghost,
Yes.
inventory, because they have no clue.
Bomb, bill of materials based inventory, synthetic SKUs, virtual SKUs, all these things that you really only can account for in a true ERP system, because a standard accounting system doesn't have these concepts of complex inventory management.
Exactly. So when you look at this more from the financial lenses, and again, my finance peers might say that, you know what, that is not finance. Okay, finance is just the general ledger. Okay, I only care for my P&L. I don't care for anything else. That's what my CFO is gonna say, because they don't necessarily have this whole micro perspective. So ERP sort of falls into that zombie land. Okay, that nobody really cares, nobody understands what the hell ERP is. But let's say if you really want the financial integrity, financial accountability of every single transaction, every single channel that you have in the business, then you have to implement a process called operational or channel reconciliation. And 90% of the e-commerce operators, they may have done DTC, but they have no clue what is operational reconciliation. And once you have that, meaning you have to reconcile every single channel where each of the inventory is, which warehouse it is sitting on, what was the cost of that, and whether it was returned, or you are going to get some sort of a statement from your Amazon. If you have Amazon, you are going to get some statement from your Shopify. So all of these are
Well, from
different
your
channels.
3PL, because inventory sits in not always in your own inventory locations. Sometimes they're spread everywhere. You've got some in an FBA warehouse. You've got some in a 3PL warehouse. You have some in your own warehouse. You could have inventory spread. You could have some that's flooring with the contract manufacturer that's sitting in their warehouse, where in some cases they'll dispatch it directly on your behalf, but you own that inventory. And so you have to be able to track inventory across multiple dimensions, I think, is what you're referring to. Because in some channels, you're going to want to put buffers in there. You're going to want to say, okay, I've got 10 in stock, but I'm not going to send 10 a unit count of 10 to that channel, because I only want them to have 10% of that channel available to them, so that we don't oversell. And then we've got stock on hand versus ready to sell. We've got manufactured products where they are components of a larger SKU, or components of a BOM. So you've got to have calculated inventory, where you say, okay, this product, this virtual SKU is composed of these 5 components.
Yeah.
And if I've got 5 of each of those 5 components, well, then I've got 5 of that synthetic SKU. I've got 5 of those in stock. But if I've got 5 of 4 of the components, but I only have 4 of one of the components, then I really only have 4 in stock of the synthetic SKU, because I can't make up a full 5 of that synthetic SKU or that BOM. And so I think what you're referring to here is scenarios, particularly in the B2B world. This is not as common of a challenge in the straight up B2C, DTC world, where I bring in 50 units of something and I sell 50 units of something, and it just kind of is what it is. I think especially in the manufacturing world, where we've got supply chain management considerations, componentized things that we're building and we're assembling. Some of it we maybe manufacture ourselves. Some of it we're bringing in from somewhere else to put it together into a package or a bundle or a kit. We in the B2B world, we have such different expectations around inventory management that there's no analog for it. There's no comparison for it in the B2C world.
Exactly. Some things could be interesting in the B2C world as well. When you get into the real scenarios, for example, let's say
omni-channel in particular. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, for example, let's say some people complain that this is the world that we should know pretty much everything. Okay, so when I'm walking into the store, I'm looking at my blue shirt. I want a medium. Can you confirm? Do you have in the stock? And if you confirm, then obviously my expectation is going to be that you are going to ship by the date you had promised. Now you are going to book it, okay, but you will not be able to ship it because you never had that product to begin with. So you are going to have these discrepancies across the system, just because even if you are going to be off one product in the inventory, you are probably off. And in general, 90% of the businesses, the way they are running, they are off by a lot, because
Yes.
there is no way to maintain the state of that inventory unless that is maintained in one data model, and that is the foundation of ERP. ERP is supposed to be one data model, operationally, transactionally. You have to maintain that state. The more data silos you are going to have, the more problems you are trying to create for yourself. If you are simply tracking some bunch of marketing data, images, or whatever, you are probably going to be okay there. Okay, it's not as bad. But when it comes to the real inventory supply chain, you cannot afford to be off by one. But again, if you are doing this at the relatively macro level, and that's why that's how majority of the retail operations work. Hey, I'll give you 5,000 products in the morning. You sell whatever you can sell. Report back what you, and I'll
At the end of the
somehow
day,
account.
we'll do a rec at the end of the day overnight. It'll run as a cron job overnight, and then we'll push out the updated inventory numbers to all the channels in the morning at 8 a.m. or something.
Exactly, but that is not possible when you are dealing with very expensive products or very
Yes.
specific products.
Yes. Yes, that's
Then you
right.
require very deep accountability. So again, it depends upon the business model. It depends upon which micro vertical that we are talking about in the manufacturing distribution space, where you would require consolidated operations, and wherever you need that, you probably would need an ERP.
And one of the other things that I'd love to get your take on is that part and parcel of ERP for B2B in particular is this concept of demand planning, right?
Yeah.
Centralized demand planning. And as you rightly pointed out, sometimes people want to carry on using their external CRM systems as opposed to the CRM that might be included with their favorite ERP.
Yeah.
The challenge is we then don't have as much, unless they're tightly integrated and custom integrated. Usually they have to be custom integrated to be tightly integrated in most instances. Without that, if we do not have visibility across forecast demand, because we're in the B2B world, we're constantly in conversation with our buyers, right?
Yeah.
Constantly, whether it's manufacturer to distributor, whether it's distributor to a retailer, or distributor to a master distributor to a sub distributor, or distributor to a business consumer of those goods. There's this constant flow of information, usually managed in a CRM, around forecasting of demand, forecasting of sales. So in the B2C and D2C world, there is still the demand, the nature of demand planning, but this is much more influenced by things like seasonality and drops and design pipelines and NPD and things like that. Whereas in the B2B world, this is much more determined and much more influenced by the sales process, right? The sales management process. And as a result of that, when we have indent sales and all sorts of other concepts in the B2B world that usually do not exist we have replenishment, we have all sorts of other concepts that live in the B2B space exclusively that just really don't live in the B2C and D2C world. And one of the challenges I see is that with that 0 to 10 million silo idea is that oftentimes once we move into a full-blown ERP world where we're wanting to centralize this idea and centralize the data models around our customer data model, our product data model, our inventory data model, our P&L model, our general ledger model, all those things need to be centralized in the system, but also our demand planning ideally needs to be centralized in this system. But if we have no visibility into our sales pipeline and what that looks like, and being able to do accurate sales forecasting, because our CRM is completely independent of the ERP, we're going to run into some real problems, aren't we?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting topic, and demand planning could be a subject in itself, I guess, right?
Yes.
And there are specialized systems just for demand planning, and there are some segmentation in that as well. So one is called macro planning, and one is called micro planning. So when I say macro planning, if you go to any sort of B2C retail-centric verticals, the way they work is they are going to do, let's say, day-by-day planning for each of these two categories, and then they are going to send that plan to your ERP that is probably going to become some sort of safety stock, depending upon wherever that is going. Sometimes that goes into WMS, right? So that is going to be your macro planning, meaning you are probably planning at the day level, and whatever happens after that, it's wild, wild west. You can probably manage that inside your store, warehouse, do whatever you have to. Okay, I have given you instructions. Now it's up to you guys. You guys are operations. You are very smart. You can figure this out yourself. Okay, just somehow manage the business and report back what you have done. I'm not going to micromanage in between, right? So that is this thing. Now, to your point related to B2B, B2B verticals are different depending upon which B2B segment, and I think we need to peel some layers there. Okay, which business are we talking about, right? So sometimes this could be, let's say, in construction space, you have the contractors. That could be a B2B business. Furniture is a B2B business, right? But sometimes that could be driven by the retail drivers as well. So it's the cost of the product that generally dictates, or the category of the product that generally dictates, what kind of demand planning you are going to have. For example, let's say if you go in machinery space, okay, in manufacturing, you are probably selling maybe 12 machines a year. Okay, each machine is probably going to be $1 million or $2 million just for the machine itself. Okay, you might have a parts division for that. You might be selling a lot more there, but that is going to be a very different parts, right? So let's say you are a machinery manufacturer, you are doing OEM work, plus you are doing parts, you are doing services as well. If you are doing all of that, then your processes and the demand planning is going to be very different, because you are controlling the entire demand. You just don't have a demand, I guess.
Well, you're controlling the entire supply chain related to your product.
Exactly. I mean, if you are, if you have to supply, or you have to go from maybe 12 to 24, that's going to be a heavy lift from your planning perspective. You are not going to accept those orders overnight that, okay, I was doing 12 today and tomorrow I'm going to do 24, because you have to expand your facility. It's a different process. In retail, it's a very different process. So I would say the way demand planning works in B2B is it's all influenced by how retail your business is going to be. The whole idea of demand planning is going to be from that, but you have the intraday planning, which is going to be slightly more ERP centric process. If you are, let's say, if your components are driven by the parent demand, meaning you are shipping the machinery, but you require 10,000 components. Now, if your one part is going to be missing, then your whole production is probably going to stop, right? So that's going to be a very different demand than what you are going to have in the retail space.
And let's just, because we've used up nearly an hour already, which is just, I knew this was going to happen. It's such a deep subject, and it's such for those of us that work in this space, it's a very sexy and exciting subject. It bores a lot of people to tears, but it is such an essential topic, especially for manufacturers and distributors. Like it's such an essential topic that there's literally not a single client that I would engage with that doesn't have an ERP system at the heart of what they do. It just never happens, unless they're looking at transitioning and they bring me in, for example, to help them look at the market and say, okay, well, we've got the system that we've had for 10 years. We're looking at maybe replatforming our ERP system. Can you help us assess our requirements and maybe do some search and select for a new ERP? But these businesses, they've always got some sort of heavy duty operational system at the heart of what they do. How do you think that within the next, say, 5 years, do you think that these heavy duty, heavyweight systems, do you think they will continue to be at the heart of B2B operations for at least the next 5 years? Because I see it as there's a lot of these businesses that it's the only reason they got an ERP because it's better the devil they know, right? It's not because they love it. It's not because they're enamored with it or they think it brings massive productivity to their business. They're going, it's a necessary evil in our business.
Yeah.
No, we don't love it. We just have to have it, and we can't do business without it.
Yeah.
Do you think we're going to get to a place either where the existing major players in the ERP space make their systems, perhaps with AI or some other improvements to their systems, make them so easy to use that people begin to love them? Or do you think that they'll be replaced by something that is not an ERP, that there'll be some sort of business management system that will come into play and really threaten the dominance of these major players?
Okay, so I'll give you an example. I don't know whether you have heard of the CRM system called ATO. That's a new category of system. Okay.
No.
So what they are saying is Salesforce is legacy already. Can you believe this? Okay, Salesforce is legacy, and we are going to take over the whole CRM market right now. Okay, it's pretty cool technology. And by the way, this is not just for the CRM. There are newer breed of ERP systems that are in the market, and they are very well funded by the private equity at this point of time. And they are claiming that we have found a formula to replace these transactional
ERPs.
I call this as more of the transactional systems. So the hate is towards the transactional systems. The hate is not necessarily towards ERP. Anything that is going to have very relational data model, very transactional, that's what people hate because they don't like traffic rules. That's the reality. Okay. So now if you look at the fundamentals of these these systems. For example, let's say if you look at Monday.com, Airtables of the world, you look at, Smartsheet. The reason why
Yes.
they are so easy to use is because they are schema-less. And what that
Yes.
means is that you have killed all your traffic rules at the database level.
They're
Wonderful idea.
boundaryless.
Wonderful idea. But the reality is that you don't have traffic rules. Okay?
Mhm.
And you need traffic rules to be able to grow. You need traffic rules in your real life. You need traffic rules. Okay? And you need traffic rules. Wonderful idea. But the reality is that you don't have.
They've got, in other words, they've got boundaries and they've got business rules in them that are going to only slow you down. That's the sales pitch, right?
For the backend, when you do that, when you kill those traffic rules, when you are going to follow the traffic rules, you are not going to get as many deviations. That's the overarching intent. And this is all driven by, I don't know how many people have read something called CAP theorem. This is all coming from database, and I don't know if somebody has found a solution for that. It's very academic in nature. Okay, traditionally, if you look at any of the traditional IT systems, any of the databases, they were good at two things. You cannot get three things. These are like constraints of your project management. Okay, either
Yes.
you get, quality.
Price,
What is that?
timeline, quality.
Exactly.
Pick any two.
Exactly. You just don't get three, and these are real world constraints. So if people are arguing with the fundamentals of systems, I really don't know. And by the way, these are very well invested companies, and they are doing that. And the reason for that is because it's also driven by sales, to be completely honest. Because SaaS is far easier to sell,
Of course. Of
right?
course it is.
Because they are claiming that it's all easy. But as a customer, you are never going to get that, because you are arguing with the fundamentals of nature, I guess. And if you are going to do that, I don't think, again, see, and that's why I had one comment related to AI, that AI may be able to do this because AI is going to do all the grunt work for you in your incomplete system, in your, what is that called, imperfect
Messy
system,
system, your
messy
flexible
system.
system,
Exactly. So
you
AI
know?
is doing all the housekeeping for you, but system is still messy. Okay,
Yes.
because you are buying mass. That's what you are buying. If you, and people are arguing that the mass is better, I guess, for
Wow.
whatever reason. That's what
Well,
they are.
I think the terms that I've heard bandied about, and look, I have some friends that work in the Airtable space, and they're amazing, and they're building custom apps on top of Airtable that are speeding time to market. They're dramatically reducing costs. They're replacing SaaS systems in these businesses with custom Airtable apps. So I've seen some real big benefits of these systems, but the people building the apps are the ones that build the traffic rules and build the rules on top of Airtable. So the reality is that when they build the app, they have to conceptualize the rules because with Airtable you can do anything. It's completely flexible. And so what these app developers do is they tailor the rule set to the needs of the specific business instead of saying it's an open free for all, open slather. But I think the sales jargon that I hear, particularly in the B2B space, is the concept of rigid versus flexible systems. And the reality is that we probably need to land somewhere in the middle, meaning that a completely rigid system is really difficult to customize. It's really difficult to configure. It's really difficult to adapt for your specific business needs. But total flexibility and total open slather is ridiculous too, because it means that your data can be formatted in 1,000 different ways. There's no consistency to it. There's no default rule set. There's no default formatting. There's no default field names. There's no default consistency to absolutely anything. That creates total chaos in a business, right? Especially a business trying to scale, because you can't scale chaos. You can only scale consistent things. And so what I think is we're probably going to get to a place where we need to fall and land somewhere in the middle. And that means that we have systems that have some default workflows, they've got some default rules, they have some default, data models and data objects,
Yeah.
but that they are flexible enough that we can configure and or customize them for specific business needs. And I think that, as an example, NetSuite to me is a pretty good middle of the road mix between rigid and flexible, meaning that one of the things I like about NetSuite is if you build a new data object in the system, or you add a new custom field to an existing data object, for example, that is immediately assigned a field number, a field ID, and is immediately exposed to the API. Now, what I like about that is I don't require a developer or a programmer or someone special, some sort of special NetSuite admin to all of a sudden, if I decide I need this extra data element against this object, I can just add it. And then if I need my system integrator to get data into that field from an external system or push that data out to an external system, that can happen almost immediately without a lot of customization. And to me, that feels like a sustainable and scalable approach to customization.
So here's the take on that. So that's a very interesting argument. 90% of the ERP systems that we have in the market, they are pretty good, and they are taking, all of them are taking middle of the road approach. In fact, I mean, SAP, one of the most hated, I guess.
Yes.
Nobody is positioning this as more than SAP, to be completely honest. SAP likes to tell you that, okay, you keep whatever needs to be kept inside the core. And when they say core, that's what I'm talking about, the operational consolidation or the consolidated operations, the term that I have been using so far, that you have to keep that in the core, and whatever else you want to do, you can do it outside. Now, to your comment related to adding the field in NetSuite, you can do that. It's going to be much easier inside QuickBooks or maybe Odoo. Again, the reason why it is so easy is because there are no traffic rules. Okay, one of the things most people don't realize is that when they are going to champion any customization, even if it is going to be minor field, even for ERP consultants, to be completely honest, okay, it's very, 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 very hard to forecast the possibility, because the MRP engine that you have, it's so complex. It's designed to support any business models, any transactions out there in the world, and that's a very complex math. Not many people get it, what that is. You can complain that it's really ugly, it's bad, but the point is that it is designed for a purpose, and nobody really can create a 80-page document that a human can read, because it's that complex. Okay, you are probably going to get 4,000-page document, and even then, you are still going to have 4 million questions. It's that complex. So that's why any ERP consultant, seasoned ERP consultant, if you talk to them, they will always tell you that, okay, customization is the last thing that you want to do with ERP. First, decide the boundary. Okay, why do you need that customization? Okay, is it some sort of marketing data that you are keeping? If you are keeping that, why are you keeping that inside ERP to begin with? You should be keeping that somewhere else. Okay, and then figure out the correlation. What is the correlation between product that is sitting inside your ERP versus e-commerce versus CRM? What is the state? How the state is going to be propagated, in these different systems, and so that's what you have to figure out. But any customization inside ERP is going to be a big no, because that is going to have impact on, I don't know, security workflow. It's going to have impact on the whole MRP algorithm. It's just too complex that. And that's why sometimes people are hesitant that I'm not going to have answers.
Totally.
Tomorrow if you are in trouble.
Totally get it. Totally agree. I think we want to, I always say that everybody uses the term MVP with every new business system, whether it's a commerce system or a CRM or an ERP or whatever. They use the term MVP, minimum viable product. We're going to launch. Phase 1 is going to be an MVP, but MVP means something different to every single consultant, SI, business. It means something different to everybody. And in many cases, the business themselves, they don't even know what MVP means for them. If it's their very first ERP implementation, an MVP to them is going to be totally different.
Now you completely froze. Okay, now you're back.
I think we're back. Right. I think the challenge is that, if a business is implementing an ERP for the very first time and they've never done it before, their MVP is going to be down here. If someone's been running an ERP for 10 years and they're replatforming to a new ERP, their MVP is going to be up here, because they're starting from a much more advanced place in their business with much more structure, many more detailed processes, probably much bigger teams, many more staff having to work in the system and manage the system. So MVP is different for everybody. And part of my job, and I think your job, is helping businesses define what MVP for ERP means to them and their specific situation in their business lifecycle. And I think that's a big, big part of the job we have to do.
Exactly. And you need to obviously align with your target state, because every target state is going to be very different from the business process perspective, from data perspective, in terms of which business model you are trying to bring in. Because today you might design the processes for the business model today, and tomorrow, let's say if you want to scale, you want to introduce another business transaction that is not supported by the ERP or the core business processes, then you are looking at replacing that again. In general, in the ERP world, or any complex system for that matter, what we see is, just because somebody's claiming that, within 2-3 months you can go live, that's not the end of the ERP journey. In general, it takes a year, 2 years
Yep.
to be
Yep.
able to understand what the hell that
To get
is.
it embedded into the business and actually get everybody using it.
Exactly. So it takes a long time. And if you're not trained right, you are going to make a lot of mistakes, and those mistakes are going to have substantial implications on the processes and business processes. And, that is going to drive what kind of data you are going to have. And everything is driven by data, to be completely honest, because that is what you're going to see in your financial statements. So again, the timeline is going to be critical as well. I guess when you look at this, it's not just the MVP, it's also going to be MVP from every single perspective, from your business process, from data, defining the state, and
Budget,
aligning the,
timeline.
yeah, exactly, the skill set. Yeah.
Absolutely. Sam, this has been amazing. Hours absolutely flown by. Just by way of telegraphing some of the things we're going to cover in the upcoming episodes in this ERP for B2B Master Series, we're going to talk some more ERP basics. We're going to talk about things like ERP selection. Which ERP is right for you? How do you even determine that? Whether you're working with a consultant or whether you're not, what kind of criteria should you be looking for? What things will make a difference to you, material difference to you and your business if you get it wrong? So getting it right first time, I think, is really, really important. So we're gonna talk about key criteria of the ERP selection process. We're then going to start talking about, what does an ERP implementation for a manufacturer or distributor, what does that actually look like? What do these businesses need to do in preparation even before the implementation begins? What do they need to get ready? What data sets do they need to prepare? How do they define goals for the project? What do they think about educating the business and make sure that there's buy-in and bandwidth? I think those two things are critical. How do we have buy-in, and how do we have bandwidth, and how do we free up bandwidth in the business to actually be able to do an ERP implementation successfully? Then we start thinking about, okay, the specific requirements, definition, and gathering process. We need to define some use cases. We need to prioritize these use cases. We need to understand that an ERP is not a silver bullet. It's not going to do everything in our business. As much as those ERP sales reps would love us to believe it can run our entire business on autopilot, automated, that's not true. So we need to understand that, and we need to be realistic about what we're expecting to come from our ERP. Then we need to start thinking about the key data models that need to be supported by our ERP to fulfill all of our business needs once it's actually implemented. We need to start thinking about governance and security and a few other things. We need to think about, how is this going to impact how we engage with our buyers, with our customers? We as a supplier, well, that's great. This ERP hopefully is going to bring a whole lot of efficiency to our business, but what impact is that going to have on the people that are buying our stuff? And we want to try to mitigate the fallout of these major system changes as part of our change management process. We want to try to mitigate the fallout of these major system changes for our customers. We want to make sure that they always end up in a better situation post-implementation than a worse situation post-implementation. We're going to start talking about key integration considerations. We're going to talk about lots of different things in relation to ERP, but I think we've set the groundwork on what an ERP is, what an ERP isn't, what impact an ERP has on B2B business operations, or what impact it should have on B2B operations. And then we talked about key inflection points of where and when a B2B operation should start considering the need for an ERP and when they can actually justify it in their business. Sam, fantastic conversation. Can't wait till our next one. Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.